Rome was never meant to fall. The Eternal City was founded by Romulus, who killed his twin brother, Remus, after the two of them had been raised by a she-wolf. Upon finding the 7 hills that would become the base of Rome's imperial power, what if the Western Roman Empire, which at one point controlled almost the entirety of the Mediterranean, and had Britain and the far reaches of North Africa under their control, never collapsed? Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out what would have happened if the Western Roman Empire never fell. So too was it fated that Rome would last forever. Tensions rise until, like so many political rivals throughout history, they end up going to war with each other. But it's clear that any child could not hope to rule the vast empire left by Romulus. In fact, most of Rome's enemies see the child Romulus as a figurehead only, with the real power being held by his mother, the formidable Julia Maesa. And when Odoacer dies, there is no one to stop the various Germanic chieftains from uniting and launching a full-scale invasion of Italy. It falls to the young Emperor Romulus, finally coming into his own as a powerful leader, to raise an army to defend his homeland. As the centuries pass, Rome grows in power. Its legions push into the heart of Germania, subjugating the tribes that once raided the northern borders. The population of Rome grows to 500,000 inhabitants, maybe even more. Meanwhile, the emperors draw from the ranks of the Senate, choosing competent leaders who value tradition and law. Feudalism never emerges because it doesn't need to. Rome's traditional system of land ownership never breaks down. Great works of engineering are undertaken, such as aqueducts that bring water from faraway alpine lakes, and grand public works projects that allow the city to flourish. There are still conflicts, however, such as with the Ottoman Turks, who have grown in power and seek to conquer Constantinople and the eastern half of the Roman Empire. The Romans fight to hold on to their ancestral lands and succeed, repelling the Ottomans. The Low Countries and even northern Italy are Romanized. Rome's population reaches 750,000 people, and its economy is the greatest in the world. The French revolutionary leader Napoleon Bonaparte comes into conflict with Rome, perhaps when he invades Egypt and threatens the Roman-held city of Alexandria. And strategies allow him to defeat the Romans and force them to sign a treaty, ceding the former Western Roman provincias in Gaul, Germania, and even Italy itself, granting them estates in the Balkans and promising to restore the Western Roman Empire if they swear fealty to the Eastern Roman Emperor. Check out my latest video on what would happen if Alexander the Great never died. Will they agree? Or will Rome's final fate be to dissolve completely into the rising tide of nationalism sweeping Europe? You decide in the comments below. Overthrown in a palace coup, the once proud Roman emperors flee to Constantinople, where they beg the Eastern Roman Emperor for asylum. The Roman Emperor chooses to intervene in Europe. During this time, the Renaissance popes beautify the city of Rome, constructing grand churches and palaces, and drawing artists from across the empire to make Rome the most beautiful city in the world. The old Roman provinces of the West are secured once more, and trade flourishes across the empire, connecting the Mediterranean with the riches of the New World and the resources of Northern Europe. Outside of Italy, feudalism did develop, as it did in our own timeline, and persists throughout the western half of Rome's empire. Soon, revolutionaries across Europe overthrow their monarchs and establish sending many members of the royal class fleeing to Rome, begging the Roman emperor for asylum. Indeed, perhaps in this alternate timeline, the vast majority of Europe is still a rural, illiterate place where lords and ladies rule over peasants. Only Rome itself stands as a bastion of civilization and culture, surrounded by a decadent court. Rome is truly a cosmopolitan city. Throughout the Middle Ages, Rome's population is a mix of many different cultures and peoples, united under the banner of Rome and the Roman emperors. Against the odds, he manages to repel the invaders and secures the borders of Rome, and commissions him to sail west in search of riches for Rome. Rome's fleet escorts Columbus across the Atlantic and establishes a base in the New World, colonizing and bringing great wealth to Rome. From this point on, Rome becomes even more powerful. As a result, Many of Rome's former subjects rebel. Even worse, Odoacer seizes the opportunity to take the young Romulus hostage, forcing the Senate to recognize him as the true ruler of Rome and the Western Empire. And yet both men are skilled generals and commanders. Neither can best the other in battle. The stalemate only ending with the death of Romulus Augustulus, perhaps assassinated by one of his many enemies in the Senate. But sadly, we all know how this story actually played out, with the support of the Roman army and the prestige of being the first emperor since the deposition of Julius Caesar, ensuring that he is well cared for and educated in hopes that he can one day see the former Western Roman emperor as a friend and ally, not a rival. Soon, Rome begins to thrive once more, growing in population and wealth. Building projects finish, trade routes reopen, and the economies. However, outside of Rome, the empire is still in sharp decline. Romulus, Augustulus, and Odoacer begin ruling Rome together, dividing powers perhaps, with Odo having greater military authority while Romulus stays in the capital, ensuring stability in the city. And yet, what if Rome had lived up to its name and never fallen? Perhaps he even marries the emperor's daughter, securing the union of Rome and beginning to rebuild the Western Roman Empire. After all, throughout much of the medieval period, the Holy Roman Empire would claim to be the continuation of the Western Roman Empire. Perhaps here, in our altered timeline, that dream becomes a reality. Odoacer had experience fighting on the front lines and wanted to focus on strengthening the defenses of Italy against the ever-present threat from the Goths, the Huns, and the other tribes of northern Europe. He also would want to expand the empire westwards, retaking control of Gaul, Spain, and Britain, which had broken away from Roman control. Even before the fall of the Western Roman Empire, his rival, Romulus, would want to follow in the footsteps of his imperial predecessors, focusing on luxury building projects in Rome itself, and asserting Roman superiority through culture rather than through war. This is ancient history vs. Now let's go back to the year 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, was deposed by the Germanic general Odo. We know that in our timeline, Rome would continue on as the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, but eventually succumb to the rising tide of Slavic and other peoples who were migrating into the Balkans. But let's change the outcome of that fateful day in 476. Instead of deposing Romulus Augustus, perhaps the two strike a deal, working together to rule over Italy and fend off the various barbarian threats together. After all, Rome was founded on the idea of kingship and the she-wolf. Raising Romulus and Remus, destined for greatness, alludes to an almost divine right to rule, but soon the two would butt heads on how to rule over the former Western Roman Empire. The two would bicker over resources, with Odoacer focusing on the military budget and Romulus wanting more funds for public works. With Romulus dead, his son, the infant Romulus II, now becomes emperor. Despite being just a puppet, Odoacer holds the child Romulus close. Barbarian tribes still raid along the northern borders. He then turns his attention to the east, meeting with the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire to discuss reuniting the two halves of Rome and restoring it to its former glory. Rome unites with the east, beginning an era of expansion, conquering the Vandals in North Africa, regaining control of Spain, and pushing north to reconquer Gaul and Britain. In fact, perhaps the discovery of the Americas happens in the year 1000 by a Roman explorer, or perhaps a Roman admiral, allowing Rome to expand further and become truly the master of the world. The Roman Senate is revitalized, becoming the center of political life in the western half of the empire. The Catholic Church, meanwhile, has its headquarters in Rome and becomes incredibly powerful, but not to the exclusion of paganism and other religions. In the year 1492, when Christopher Columbus reaches the Americas, it is the Roman emperor who gives him his noble titles and engages in trade with the East through the Silk Roads and with the Americas, becoming incredibly wealthy and powerful. As the Renaissance begins, Rome finds itself at the center of the classical learning that inspires artists and scientists across the empire. However, the prosperity of Rome does not extend to its entire empire. This continues until the French Revolution, which begins in this timeline, as it did in ours, overthrowing the monarchy and establishing a republic. Rome must now decide whether to remain neutral in this European conflict or get involved, perhaps seeing this as an opportunity to finally conquer and pacify the rest of Europe, ending feudalism once and for all. But despite having one of the largest standing armies in the world, the Roman army is unprepared for the likes of Napoleon, whose innovative tactics. Perhaps the Eastern Roman Emperor sees this as an opportunity to unite the two halves of Rome once more and welcomes his cousins with open arms. Thank you for watching. And remember, Rome was never meant to fall. But what about Greece?